Howdy again, folks. Ehud here. This is a podcast about Christ's kingdom, kinism, and everything relative thereto. Kinism being that radical notion that the Great Commission does not abolish the nations, but rather redeems them. Today's topic is the movie Logan, and spoiler alert, I will be divulging some details of the film. I hadn't expected to plunge into any movie reviews so soon after having started this podcast, but the story Logan, aka Wolverine, aka James Howlett, strikes me of worthy of some exception. First, let me say, as a very earthy character struggling to uncover his own roots and hunted on all sides by agents of scientific government, the Wolverine character resonated with my teenage self. Even if I haven't been a reader of comics for more than 2 decades, and Marvel has no doubt taken steps to denature the character since, his backstory is still compelling. Born sometime in the 1800s in the Northwest wilderness, and always preferring less modernized, out-of-the-way places like woodlands, small towns, and country road saloons, Logan walked the earth a man born out of time. I saw the 2 preceding installments of the Wolverine franchise, both of which were rather awful, so I went into this 3rd chapter with very low expectations, but I confess I liked this concluding chapter, Logan. A lot, actually. Some multi-cult propaganda notwithstanding, and parental warning, the first quarter of the movie is profanity-laden and contains a flash of female nudity. But the year is 2025. All mutants, save a sparse few, are dead. Their genome is all but entirely confined now to the weaponized experiments of technocrats and world government. In this installment, we meet an aged and declining old man Logan, having devolved to the incognito station of limousine driver on the U.S. side of the Texan-Mexico border, where he and his fellow mutant Caliban tend to the enfeebled and dementia-addled Charles Xavier in a remote shop-turned-ramshackle desert home, which might best be described by the word tetanus. The opening scene, though quite gritty, is refreshing for the frank and ominous depiction of a post-white America. Therein, Logan is set upon by a pack of Mexicans who shoot him down without a word for merely daring to ask them not to steal the source of his livelihood, his limo, and no doubt for being an uppity gringo. So when he staggers back to his feet and eviscerates the cholos, the viewer is happy to see them get their comeuppance. That's a surprising turn of happenstance in a movie like this. But Logan is shortly approached by a Mexican nurse with a young girl in tow. The woman, having recognized him as Wolverine, infamous as he was from years prior with the X-Men, now one of the last of his kind, she pleads with Logan to transport herself and the little girl named Laura to a set of coordinates along the Dakotan-Canadian border. The long and short of which is that Laura turns out to be Logan's daughter, and possessed of abilities like his own. Well, a daughter may not be the exact word for it. She was bred by the technocrats from Logan's DNA and gestated in a womb of some nameless Mexican woman. But in light of the confusion introduced by her laboratory genesis, daughter is the closest approximation we can make of her relation to Logan. And it comes as no small surprise that Laura's and, like experimental children being bred, patented, weaponized for state use, and raised in government dormitories, is intimated as profound tragedy, because it actually exemplifies the liberal dream. To the credit of the scriptwriter, he portrayed that total scientific institutionalization of children championed by the post-family left today as nothing less than a nightmarish failure, which can only crush the soul and yield the most broken and feral psyches. It may be on account of the nature of the central character himself, but with disquieting scenes of driverless robotic freight trucks barreling along oblivious to anyone that happens into their path, tracking chips, surveillance cameras, the ubiquitous GM foods, cyborgs, clones, and GM children, the movie actually does take a strongly implied stance against technocracy. Logan represents the vestiges of the natural world pushing back against the new artificial world bent on overthrowing nature forever. But they swaddled their propaganda in the midst of this otherwise good narrative by making the cyborg army of Reavers all burly white men, and their quarry, the escaped lab-bred mutant children, almost entirely non-white. So, in a post-white future, all the villains remain white, and the children whom Logan, a white man himself, must save are all non-white. Pure coincidence, no doubt. But dispelling all doubt, the leader of the cyborg army turns out to be a blonde-haired, blue-eyed Aryan poster child, sporting a traditional crew cut, which is lately called the fasci cut. And just as a cherry on top, he has a molasses southern drawl, too. So the penultimate villain in the film is not only white, but the only blonde, as well as the only Southron. Yeah, that's right. The face of the post-white world of technocrat amalgamation is a Confederate Nazi. Yeah. Marvel, if you're listening, a guy with metal bones is actually far more believable than your subplot pinning responsibility for the multicult technocracy on Aryan super soldiers. That's too far-fetched even for comics. There's also a defining segment in which Logan, Xavier, and Laura are taken in for the night by a Heartland ranching family. This little brood having all the cultural markers of a conservative Christian family. The father is loving, mother respectful of her husband, the son obedient to his parents, and a champion horse rider besides. They say grace and sup together around a common table, a sadly rarefied custom today. Which all provides Xavier an object lesson against Logan's MGTOW behavior, and which he advises Logan to emulate by settling down into family life with his newfound daughter. This little farm family represents the life Logan never had. All of which would have been wonderful, really, if not spoiled by the glaring lie in it. Did I mention that the little salt-of-the-earth ranching family is black? Yeah, because the countryside's just chock full of intact, wholesome black farming families. The Huxtables of Mayberry, you know. Talk about a rare bird, right? Might as well have made them unicorn ranchers. Well, but this provides, again, another psychological juxtaposition, doesn't it? On the run from evil southern Gestapo white men, the protagonist, who happens to be white as well, finds safe haven with placid, salt-of-the-earth black folks. That's why, in some ways, this story was better told by Mel Gibson under the title Bloodfather. Yeah, apart from the absurd ethnic mythologizing in Logan, the meta-narrative which resonates in each is one and the same. Think about it. Both feature declining and demoralized warriors who, having lost all else, are suddenly sought out by their estranged daughters, and must face down all the nightmare forces of the modernist dystopia in a last-ditch effort to redeem their precarious legacies. It is the story of patriarchy fallen, despairing, and at last sought out by daughters not yet wholly assimilated into the Comintern as the foremost hedge of protection against the same. One depicts a man fighting to save his white daughter from the encroaching ethnic diversity. The other is up against the transhumanist singularity. But this is really a distinction without a difference, as the protagonist in each is driven by the instincts of paternity and kinship against the same humanist modernism defined as much by multiculturalism as technocracy. The antagonists in each reflect the same New World Order Comintern in equal measure. Logan, like Bloodfather, is ultimately about the redemption of bloodlines and marginalized fathers getting one last chance to put the pieces back together for posterity's sake. And the desperation of that unexpected last chance comes with the implicit mandate of self-sacrifice unto death. And the fact that the returning prodigals are daughters rather than sons, and seeking the strong protection of fathers, is a vindication of patriarchy against feminism. As if to say, in the voice of those daughters, liberalism has ruined everything, made my life a mess, and threatens my very existence. Only Daddy can protect me now. And that plea for protection from daughters is like a key forged expressly to open the hearts of fathers, no matter how hardened. And Logan's jaded heart is on full display when he faces his greatest enemy, a clone of himself in his prime. If reclamation of his patriarchal role and redemption of his line define the meta-narrative, the plot hinges on his battle with himself, his old self, full of reckless, conscienceless rage. When it comes down to it, his own sins were always the biggest threat to his daughter and his legacy. And to salvage something for her now, and some meaning for the sordid life he lived, his old man, his sin, must be mortified. But to save his daughter and the other mutant children of sundry races, and deliver them to the appropriately titled Sanctuary Eden, his old identity must die. But before that clone representative of his sins dies, he hangs Logan upon a tree, battered, depleted, and pierced through the abdomen by a branch, as if by a spear. And so concludes the life of Logan. He died to save his people, and coming full circle, was buried somewhere along the Canadian border, the same place where he was actually born. Albeit a muddled metaphor, we find Logan to clearly be a type of Christ. What then shall we say of this? For my money, Brian Godawa has made a compelling case that all stories are meaningful only in direct proportion to how faithfully they parallel Christian theology. Think about it by reference to the antithesis. I mean, when you reflect on any Asian cinema, or even experimental Western-made works intentionally detouring from classic protagonist, antagonist, innocence, fall, alienation, trial, redemption, reunification components of Occidental storytelling, the end product is always very off somehow. Even if you can't put your finger on it, most people seem to sense something very out of order about Asian or nihilist storylines. Yeah, no matter the production value, the actor's skill, or directorial pizzazz, the further afield from Christian theology a story wanders, the more one is left with an itch unscratched. All stories, in some essential way, in order to find meaning, must reiterate the gospel. This is how, in spite of certain glaring flaws, and in contrast to the previous Wolverine movies, as well as the overall Hollywood worldview, Logan works. And only by borrowing heavily from Christian themes. Thanks for listening. This is Ehud, signing off.